You think you know who God is, but what if I told you that ancient Christians believed the God of the Old Testament was actually a cosmic mistake, a deformed monster who trapped humanity in a prison of flesh and lies? Yeah, that's not some edgy Reddit atheism, that's Gnosticism, and it's been hiding in plain sight for 2,000 years. The Gnostics read the same Bible, you know, the same Genesis, the same prophets, but they saw something completely different. Something that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about good and evil. Because in their version, the creator of our world isn't divine, he's ignorant, he's jealous, and he's been gaslighting humanity since the Garden of Eden. His name is Yaldabaoth, and according to the Gnostics, he's the biggest fraud in cosmic history. So let us talk about why these early Christians thought the God who said let there be light was actually the villain of the story. Picture this, you're a Gnostic sitting in some hidden gathering in 2nd century Alexandria and someone's reading Genesis out loud. But here's the twist, every time God does something you're not supposed to be in awe, you're supposed to be horrified. When God says, I am a jealous God in Exodus, you're not hearing divine passion. You're hearing a tyrant admitting he's insecure. When he demands blood sacrifices and threatens to punish children for their parents' sins, you're not seeing justice, you're seeing a bully with cosmic powers. The Gnostics looked at the Old Testament and thought, wait, this doesn't sound like the ultimate divine source. This sounds like someone pretending to be ultimate. And that's exactly what they believed Yaldabaoth was, a pretender, an archon, a false god who doesn't even know there's something higher than himself. Now you're probably wondering, okay, so where did this Yaldabaoth character even come from? Here's where it gets wild. According to Gnostic texts like the Apocryphon of John, which was hidden in the Egyptian desert until 1945, the true God, the real ultimate source they called the monad or the one, is completely transcendent beyond our universe, beyond matter, beyond anything we can conceive. This true God didn't create our world. That's the whole point. Our world came from a mistake, a cosmic accident. Sophia, which means wisdom, was one of the divine emanations from the true God, and she wanted to create something without her partner, which in Gnostic cosmology is a big no-no because creation is supposed to be balanced. So Sophia creates alone, and what comes out is this malformed thing, Yaldabaoth, and he's described as having the face of a lion and the body of a serpent. Seriously, that's in the text. Sophia is immediately horrified by what she's made and tries to hide him away. But Yaldabaoth doesn't know he's a mistake. He looks around at the empty chaos and thinks he's the first, the only, the most powerful being in existence. And here's the kicker. This is when he says it. That famous line from Isaiah that you've heard a million times. I am God and there is no other. The Gnostics read that and said, yeah, exactly. He's lying, because there is another, the true God he doesn't even know exists. Yaldabaoth is so ignorant he thinks he's the source of everything. His very name reveals his nature. Yaldabaoth possibly means child of chaos or child come forth to the void, and some scholars think it's a deliberate corruption of Yahweh and Sabaoth, the traditional names of the Hebrew God. The Gnostics were literally taking the sacred names and twisting them to show that this being was a distortion of true divinity. So what does an ignorant demiurge with a god complex do? He creates archons, these lesser rulers, these authorities, and together they create the material world as a prison. Think about that for a second. The Gnostics looked at physical reality, at suffering, at decay, at death, and said this isn't the work of a loving God, this is a cage. Matter itself is a trap designed to keep divine sparks. That's us, that's our true essence, locked away from the real God. And here's where the Bible gets reinterpreted in the most mind-bending way possible. Remember the Garden of Eden. Remember how God tells Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of knowledge. Standard reading says that's a test of obedience. But the Gnostics said, hold on, why would a good God want to keep humans ignorant? Why would knowledge be forbidden? Their answer flips the entire story. The serpent in the garden isn't the villain. The serpent is the hero. The serpent represents Sophia or Christ or divine wisdom trying to wake humanity up, trying to give us gnosis, which means knowledge, specifically knowledge of our true divine nature. When Eve eats the fruit, she's not falling into sin. She's achieving enlightenment. She's seeing through Yaldabaoth's lies. And what does Yaldabaoth do? He loses his mind. He curses them. He kicks them out. He makes childbirth painful and work hard, because he has a jealous prison warden who just watched his inmates learn their SA world outside their cell. Every single act of divine wrath in the Old Testament gets reread through this lens. The flood, Yaldabaoth trying to destroy humanity because we're learning too much. The Tower of Babel, Yaldabaoth terrified that humans working together might actually escape his control. All the rules, all the commandments, all the blood sacrifices demanded in Leviticus, they're not holy rituals. They're Yaldabaoth's attempts to keep humanity distracted, to keep us believing that our salvation comes from appeasing him, when really salvation comes from realizing he is not even the real God. You can see why the early church fathers absolutely hated this stuff, right? Because if the Gnostics are right, then the entire power structure of organized religion is built on worshipping the wrong deity. The implications are absolutely staggering when you think about it. Every prayer ever offered to the God of Abraham could be feeding the ego of a cosmic fraud. Every commandment followed could be tightening the chains of our imprisonment. Every moment spent in fear of divine judgment could be exactly what Yaldabaoth wants, because fear keeps us from looking inward where the real truth lives. Now, here's where it connects to Jesus. Because the Gnostics were Christians, remember, they just had a radically different take. In their view, Jesus wasn't the son of Yaldabaoth. He was an emissary from the true God, from the monad beyond the material prison. Jesus came to reveal the gnosis, to tell people the kingdom of God is within you, not in some temple, not in following Yaldabaoth's laws, but inside your own divine spark. When Jesus challenges the Pharisees and the religious authorities, the Gnostics saw that as him challenging Yaldabaoth's entire system. When he says in the Gospel of Thomas, which is a Gnostic text, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you, he's talking about recognizing your own divinity. The crucifixion in Gnostic Christianity takes on a different meaning too. Some texts claim Jesus didn't actually suffer on the cross because the divine Christ had already left the physical body, because matter doesn't bind the divine. Other Gnostic texts suggest someone else was crucified in Jesus. This place while Jesus laughed at the archons from the spiritual realm because they thought they could kill truth itself. Either way, the point was that Yaldabaoth and his archons thought they won. They thought they silenced the messenger, but the message of Gnosis couldn't be stopped. The Gnostics had this whole hierarchy of archons mapped out, 7 of them usually, each one ruling over a planetary sphere, each one trying to keep souls trapped as they attempt to ascend back to the true God after death. These archons are like cosmic border guards, and they're named after the Old Testament God's attributes, Sabaoth, Adonai, names that sound holy but in Gnostic cosmology are actually the names of prison guards. The material world we live in is called the pneuma, the emptiness, the deficiency, as opposed to the pleroma, the fullness, where the true God dwells. We're living in the deficient realm, the knockoff reality, and everything here is designed to make us forget where we really came from. But here's something that'll really mess with your head. The Gnostics believed that when humans were created, Yaldabaoth and his archons tried to make us in their image. But Sophia secretly breathed part of a divine essence into humanity without them knowing. That's why humans have this divine spark, this pneuma, trapped inside material bodies. Yaldabaoth didn't even realize he decreated beings that had a direct connection to the realm above him, beings that could potentially remember their true origin and escape his control. That's why he's so obsessed with keeping humanity ignorant and obedient, because if we ever figure out what we really are, his whole game is over. So what happened to all this? Why don't more people know about this interpretation? Well, when Christianity became the official religion of Rome under Constantine, there was a massive effort to standardize belief, to create orthodoxy, which literally means correct opinion. The Gnostic texts were declared heretical, burned, banned, and anyone teaching Gnosticism was branded a dangerous heretic. For over 1500 years, most of what we knew about Gnosticism came from the people who hated it, from the writings of church fathers like Irenaeus, who spent entire volumes attacking it. Then in 1945, a farmer in Nag Hammadi, Egypt found a sealed jar containing 13 leather-bound books, over 50 Gnostic texts that had been hidden since around 400 CE, probably by monks who refused to burn them when ordered to. And suddenly we could read what the Gnostics actually believed in their own words, not filtered through their enemies. And it was even more radical than anyone expected. Reading these texts today, you start to notice patterns everywhere. The Gnostic idea that we're divine beings trapped in a material prison controlled by ignorant rulers. Doesn't that sound familiar? It shows up in The Matrix, in Philip K. Dick's novels, in countless conspiracy theories about reality being fake or controlled by forces that do want us to wake up. The Gnostic intuition that something is fundamentally wrong with the world, that suffering and ignorance are features not bugs of our reality, that there's hidden knowledge that could set us free, that resonates with people even now. Philip K. Dick actually claimed he had a mystical experience in 1974 where he received a transmission of information, and he spent the rest of his life trying to figure out if he'd been contacted by God, aliens, or if he'd somehow accessed the Gnostic truth that reality is a simulation controlled by a false God. Whether you buy into the full cosmology or not, the Gnostic reinterpretation of the Bible forces you to ask uncomfortable questions. What if the religious authorities throughout history have been, intentionally or not, serving the wrong master? What if the real divine does undemand worship or obedience but wants you to recognize your own divine nature? What if salvation isn't about faith in external saviors but about internal awakening? The Gnostics looked at a jealous, wrathful God who demanded total submission and said, "That's not divinity, that's tyranny, and I'm not bowing to it." They chose knowledge over faith, inner light over outer authority, and for that they were erased from history. But their ideas survived in fragments, in symbols, in the undercurrent of Western spirituality, waiting for anyone brave enough to look at the old stories and ask, what if we've been reading this wrong the whole time? And maybe that's the most dangerous question of all, not whether Yaldabaoth is real, but whether we've been conditioned to worship limitation instead of recognizing our own infinite nature, whether the greatest trick ever pulled was convincing divine beings that they're helpless sinners who need saving from the very entity that imprisoned them in the first place.